Rosato and me, we had a little pre-show warm-up here, trying to get Ken into a smaller box, uh, because
I'll just do this.
he squeezed in.
I'll
And
do
I
that.
promise on the next episode that our Dina Sword will have done her technical homework and be able to manage this intimidating digital world. But, here we go. We're doing the best. I'm doing my best, and I'm a Luddite to some extent. And that's tangential to the topic for today, because we're not talking about Luddites. We're talking about we're talking about a man who has started a company called Crowds on Demand, which is, I saw a reference to him. I whizzed by it, then I went back and I said, wait a second, I gotta, I gotta really see if this is a hoax or not. So I read it, and then I sent a note to Ken, and I said, there's this guy in California who's got this company called Crowds on Demand, which you could actually rent a crowd for political events. So I said, we got to we got to talk to him. We got to find out. We got to get the 411 on him. And his name is Adam Swart. He is out of L.A., as I stated previously. And what Adam's company does is that if you have a political event and you need some people there to hold signs and to shout slogans, stomp their feet, Adam is your guy. So Adam, tell us a little more about your company.
Well, first of all, Ardina and Ken, thanks so much for having me on the show. My mom always said, "Don't ever let anyone put you into a box." Uh, I'll echo that here. Um, my company, Crowds on Demand, we've been around for 13 years. We're the largest protest company in the country. We only do legal protests. That is to say, we won't break any laws. We do peaceful protests. We don't do vandalism, blocking highways, etc. Obviously, no violence. But we provide a very great vehicle for ordinary people who want to get involved in promoting the causes and getting paid to, speak out on issues that they're passionate about on the demonstrator side and on the side of people who, clients who really need our services to advocate for issues. And Ardina and Ken, one of the biggest things that we do, I like to say, is we're the advocates for the silent majority. Because a lot of issues, you guys, I'm sure, have been to various town council meetings or various public hearings where you have a very loud minority that always seems to get its way because they bully and they shout the loudest. And as a result, they dominate the discourse, even when the vast majority of people don't see things the same way. But the other side isn't coming out to these meetings. So they need more of an encouragement to come out. So we're actually like a great voice for democracy, in my opinion.
Adam, when you see, this is a very political climate, obviously, right now. When you see all of the protests going on, say, on college campuses, how many of them, just a guess, how many of them are organized to the point that maybe they're hired protesters? What do you think as a professional who does this?
I think a lot of them are hired, Ken, but I don't think it's a bad thing. I
Right.
think I always try to make that point is you can be paid to support something. You have left-wing attorneys, right-wing attorneys who are paid to advocate for a case. Does that mean they don't support their position? Right. You have Tucker Carlson on the right or Rachel Maddow on the left, right? They're paid very handsomely to espouse their opinions. Does that mean they don't believe those opinions? I mean, I guess it's debatable, but I would say that those are their sincere views. So it's the same thing for a protest. So to your question about these college campus protests, yeah, I think a lot of 501c4 groups pay people. I mean, there was something that I saw about something that was affiliated with one of the Soros groups where you're basically your job was being a quote unquote fellow, but the job of being a fellow was actually to attend protests. So essentially, your job was to protest. You were paid by this 501c4, and the job is to protest. I apologize if I'm wrong on the specifics, but I remember reading things like that. And there's a lot of arrangements like that by various different 501c4 groups that facilitate activism. And I don't I don't actually think that's a bad thing because I think that it's right for activists to be paid to go out there as long as those are their actual views.
Hold on. I mean, you're making a good sales pitch. I'm going to be the devil's advocate here.
Please.
Okay, but okay. So you're saying it's right for activists, and when we say activists, we're talking about the people that you hire. I assume it's right for activists to be out there, but these people are getting paid, and the same people that may be at a Democratic sponsored protest could be the same people that are at a Republican sponsored protest the next week. So I mean, they
I
don't
don't.
have any loyalty. They're out there for the bucks.
CRD, and I think that that's where there's a minor correction because that doesn't happen, right? No one is going to, you're not going to be a BLM supporter, Black Lives Matter supporter, and go to a Trump rally even if they pay you a few $100, and vice versa. A Trump supporter isn't going to go to a BLM rally and wave those flags just for a few $100. What we try to source, and I can't talk about other people, but what we make sure to source is we always ask people, do you support this cause? And we have been around for 13 years. And one of my goals specifically over the past few years is to make sure whenever we're doing an advocacy event that the people who are out there believe in the cause. We're just facilitating their participation because they have a job, they have kids. They can't just go and say, I'm going to spend 8 hours of my day at a protest for $0, right? Otherwise, only rich people and college students would be able to protest because they have the flexibility to attend.
Yeah, but if I may, Adam, but isn't that, with all due respect, isn't that part of the point of the protest? In other words, protesting when it's artificial, when it's not organic, is sort of propaganda. Because you would think that, in other words, if I can't afford to leave the kids and leave the job and come and protest out of passion, then what is the motivation? You know what I'm saying? In other words, you would think that, okay, I could have an opinion, like a lot of people have opinions. I could want this person to win an election, but I don't have the passion to leave my job, leave my kids, leave my home, and come and march in 90-degree heat unless you give me money. Then am I really coming because I have that quantity of passion, or am I coming because of the money? And I think, you know, in the era of television, you know, when people are people, in other words, when the cause is clearly setting up the rally for the cameras, because you wouldn't have protesters show up for nobody, for crickets. You want the cameras there and you want people to see, because the impression is, look, these people think this, therefore you should think this too. Am I wrong?
Well, I take a couple issues there, right? So I guess one of your points is that the suffering is the point. Well, for a lot of people, there is no cost of suffering. So you're saying, okay, the people who can do it, who might have a trust fund or who have who are college students who don't have those responsibilities, are going to be more likely to have the privilege to express their views than someone who has responsibilities. So whether you like it or not, if you don't compensate demonstrators, then essentially you're going to give disproportionate voice to those who can. It's very similar to, there are a lot of people who say that politicians shouldn't be paid, right? So if the salary for a city council member or a senator was $0, who would be able to become a senator or a city council member? The rich, right? Maybe we shouldn't be paying, but it's the same. It's sort of the same argument, right?
No, that's a valid point. But I would just say this, though, if I may, again, and I'm sorry, Ardina, for cutting in here.
Go ahead.
My issue is, if you're going to do that, like for instance, if I'm on television doing news, and we have a sponsor, say our sponsor is, let's just say, Frank's Sandwiches, okay? And in the middle of our interview, I pick up a sandwich and it says Frank's on the paper, and I start eating. Now, if I'm not getting paid, if that's just my lunch and I'm hungry, it's organic, that's fine. But if I'm doing that because Frank is putting $10 in my pocket every time I do that, now that's insincere, because there's a motive there. So my point is, if you're going to have hired protesters, is it incumbent upon the protester, the organizer, to let everybody know, these people may agree with us and they may be passionate, but we need to let you know, let's level it, they're being paid? Don't
Well,
you think that
Ken,
that's necessary at that point?
well, it's a very good question. But I think if you take your comment to its obvious extent, then we would all have to essentially put little stickers for our actual reason for going to a protest. People go to protest to impress a girl. I've seen that, right? People go to flex on Instagram. I mean, you had a lot of housewives who went to the BLM displays not because of any concern of
Virtue
BLM,
signaling.
but because they wanted to flex on Instagram and show they were
Yes.
sort of with the
You're right.
times, right? So do by your logic, we should all essentially have to wear our motivations on our jacket, right? People have all kinds. Unions, for example, are very well known for saying, okay, you go to our protests, you show up at our events, suddenly you get really good shifts, right? You don't show up at our events, you get the graveyard shift, right? Okay, that's a motive. So we all have motives. I'm making it very clear for people in a way because obviously we are providing direct compensation, but I think that you're negating the idea that every demonstrator essentially has a reason to be out there. So it's no that's no different. That might be equal to them for to receiving cash compensation.
See, yeah, my only thing is then it begs the comment from the other side of the protesters, oh, they're just paid. Because now we don't know who's paid and who isn't paid, so then the other side is just going to always dismiss and say, it's all phony, they're all paid.
Well, I think
and that's the only issue. But I don't disagree with this at all, by the way, in principle. I don't
Sure.
I don't have a problem with it. I'm just saying that as an anchor, as a journalist,
Yeah.
that's what I suspect, like especially the opinion topic shows are going to say, they're all just paid. And then what's going to happen is TV stations may start not covering those events. That's my only concern.
I think, Ken, that you are right in regards to the fact that in the broader point, which is that I think there's an increasing amount of skepticism on both political sides. If you agree with me, I assume you genuinely agree, you have pure motivations, whatever those motivations are. Right? And if you disagree with me, you're paid, you're doing it for Instagram, you're doing it to try to, for the union, you're whatever the case may be. So I think it bears examination if you want to say as a journalist, hey, people have different motivations, but I would prefer to take the crowd at face value and say, okay, let's examine the issue at stake, right? If I organize the demonstration of 1 million people, which I could, to demonstrate for something that no one supports, I will get coverage for it. Don't get me wrong. I mean, it's 1 million people, but overall, not that much is going to come from it if that isn't echoed by broader support. Just to give you an example.
That's a valid argument. That's a valid point.
I noticed in one of the articles about your company that you also provide flash mobs. And flash mobs are kind of like, I had a little whiplash with that. Because I know it's happened in LA, but it's happened a lot in New York City where flash mobs have been the bane of retailers. Because they just come through and, they're like locusts. They just come in and they've ripped off retailers, and then it becomes a whole issue with the cops, a lot of theft. When people come to you and they say, look, I want to do this, I want to be part of the flash mob, how much vetting is involved? How much screening is involved? How do you know who your people are?
Well, we do a fairly in-depth vet of everybody who does an event for us, to make sure that they're well suited for that event. So there could be a scenario where, for example, someone might be a great demonstrator for an environmental protest to oppose construction of a coal power plant, but they're not a good fit for a flash mob to promote a new tech product, right? So we always talk to people before every event. We have a team that does that. And before every event that we do, we will talk to them and say, hey, this is what we're going to do. This is the parameters of what we're doing. Do you feel like you're well suited to do it based on the constraints of the particular event?
Hey, Ardina and I have some spare time. Just a ballpark. What do we get paid?
It really depends, honestly, Ken, because it the events where you're just sort of attending as an audience member, a lot of our events are just filling seats. That pay is lower. If you're holding signs for 10 hours in the freezing cold of the northeast winter, you're going to get paid more, right? So it just depends. No two events are equal. It really depends, but it's typically in the hundreds of bucks. So
Not bad.
it's pretty good. I always try to be very fair to people but this helps us to make sure that we're able to source really quality people for any given assignment.
What happens if, God forbid, somebody gets into an altercation with a cop?
I
I
just
mean, is there how are they protected, or do you just like hands off? You're on your own, bud.
Well, it really just depends on the situation. I mean, we are very blessed to live in the United States of America, where we have a lot of protections for First Amendment rights, and I oppose any attempt by any party to try to restrict any form of First Amendment expression. And I'm very outspoken on this issue in political media. So I'm very big on First Amendment protection as it has to do with us. Number one, we don't do illegal activities, right? So we're not blocking streets, blocking bridges, vandalizing things. So we're not looking to get into situations where we're going to have an adversarial relationship with the authorities. Um, where where we speak with authorities, it's typically to establish a good relationship with them, right? So let's just say we have 1,000 people outside a convention center. You're going to have law enforcement involved, and we're going to have someone on site. If it's not me, it's someone else who's going to talk to the law enforcement folks on scene and say, hey, we're not looking to break the law here. We're here to express our rights and to have a peaceful demonstration, and we'll work with you to make sure that we don't block or disrupt anything. And you'll work with us to make sure that you provide protection for our people as you're legally mandated to do.
But the thing is that I think we all have to admit that things can change in
Right.
demonstrations. Years ago, there was an assembly, shall we say, of construction workers in Midtown, New York City, which is in the Times Square area. It was a peaceful demonstration, and things got a little heated. And the next thing you know, one of those, we believe it was a construction worker, slugged a cop's horse. And of course, there was a big discussion as to who the person was. Nobody's going to talk, but the whole point is that it happened. And there are,
The show heard around the world and started the revolution.
right,
Who did
it,
did the police start it or did the construction workers start it? There basically there's a debate there. I see.
exactly, exactly. So,
Okay.
so you're aware of it, but this is just an example. And Ken and I have covered a number of peaceful marches that ended up where we kind of had to leave a little bit, because it got kind of dicey. So here again, are you in a legal position where if one of your people does get arrested, can you then turn around and put up the bail money?
Ardina, here's one other answer to your question is it's actually you're making a great case for hiring us because we actually provide a very controlled demonstration compared to if you just have real random people who you have no idea what their deal is, right? We actually provide because our people are the people that we are bringing in are responsible people who want to demonstrate, want to make their voices heard, want to do so peacefully, and want to return home. They're not looking to cause that sort of trouble. So we've been in operation for 13 years and we've never had something like that happen
Wow.
because we're careful about the type of people we bring in. And we've probably done thousands of protests at this point. I have no idea even the total number, but we're very careful about that, about making sure that we don't have these sorts of incidents because my thing is the First Amendment making sure that the First Amendment is protected requires participation from the authorities to make sure that that is facilitated, but it also requires the protesters to conduct themselves peacefully because riots are not protests in my mind, and
Yeah, and
that's not something we do.
I'm sorry to step on you. My thought is, I mean, I believe you 100% because this is your business. And if you started having people arrested, you would have problems hiring people. You would
Yes.
have a reputation. People wouldn't bring you in. So that makes a lot of sense. And I thoroughly believe everything you're saying because this is your bread and butter. You wouldn't want that reputation getting out there. My next question would be, how prevalent is this? How big an industry is this? Are there tens of organizations without, I know you don't want to give away your competition if there is any, but are there tens, hundreds, dozens of other organizations all over the country and all over the world doing this as well?
Well, it's fairly commonplace to some extent. We're the largest in to the best of my understanding. I think there are people who do it informally and who don't advertise their services. So I can't really comment on anyone who isn't public about what they do. So I can't comment on that. Like I said, there are people who do it indirectly, where you have 501c4s that essentially pay employees, and those employees are expected to protest. So you're not paid to go to a specific protest, but rather it's expected you attend protests as part of your employment. So I can't comment to some extent on that. I don't love that way of doing business because I prefer to have people to make sure that people really support a cause for each individual demonstration. So I can't comment on really who else is out there. But we've been around. We didn't get to being 13 years old by being reckless. I'll put it that way.
And I appreciate your forthrightness in coming forward and saying this because the thing is, there have been a lot of rallies of late, protests and rallies, where people in the media have said these people are paid. Because look, as members of the media, Ardina and I have shown up at rallies, and literally like clockwork, they know the news is on from 5 to 6:30. 4:30, you'll see two buses pull up down the block. Okay.
Yeah.
There'll be signs all beautifully printed. There'll be 22 brand new megaphones charged up, ready to go. There'll be police lines up. It's like all you need is like a casting crew saying, okay, you stand here, that's it. So it's obvious to us as members of the media that this is a setup. And then literally, they'll all sit and then they'll be watching. They'll have portable TVs. The minute the 5 o'clock news starts, remember, you know this, Ardina, right? I'm not telling a lie here.
Yes.
The minute the 5 o'clock news starts, bam, bam, ba-dam, bam. I'm using the Eyewitness News theme because that's where we work.
Right.
Boom, you see them all get up and we're here. Boom. And then just the second the live shot ends, they're all sitting down again. We know that, but the problem is the people at home. If people at home get word that this is the way it is, then it looks like staged propaganda.
Well, I think the reality is that I'm a big believer in the fact that there is no such thing as an organic or quote unquote grassroots protest. I believe that everything is it's a spectrum where there's money behind every movement. Everything from civil rights, gay rights, Tea Party, right? MAGA. It's all, or anti-MAGA, right? It's all bought and paid for by someone who either has an ideological reason or an economic incentive, or perhaps both, to fund it, right? That doesn't mean there aren't people who are passionate about it, but everything, I mean, just two movements to look at recently that are worth examining, right? The Tea Party, of course, 2010. There were a lot of people very passionate about that movement, but it was bought and paid for by the Koch brothers and many other right-wing billionaires. And similar with the BLM, Black Lives Matter movement, right? There were a lot of people very passionate about it, but there were a lot of left-wing billionaires, Hollywood celebrities, and major corporations bankrolling the whole thing, right? And perhaps in many cases in the hopes that they wouldn't be called out for their racist actions, right? That's my theory, is that it's like an indulgence, like the Catholics had the indulgences where you would pay to absolve yourself of your sins. It was the same thing. You pay, Al Sharpton, you pay BLM, and then
right. How could I be a racist if I'm giving $100,000 to BLM? You can't call me a racist because I've given this money.
Correct, and it's also
Al Sharpton
BLM
made
is
his
a great
living
target.
doing that. I mean, Al Sharpton's a millionaire because of that.
Correct,
I
it's a
won't come
brilliant-
and protest if you give me $100,000
We
to my
created
charity.
Al Sharpton. We created Al
You
Sharpton.
totally did.
We
Correct,
created
and But basically, like Al Sharpton is almost is kind of created this whole business of the indulgence. That sort of, like I say, it's like the indulgence industry. You give him money and he doesn't protest, or if there is a racial scandal, you give him money and he'll try to explain it away, right? So it's a brilliant business model, but the reality is, so what I'm saying in regards to all of that is, I'm not even critiquing Al Sharpton or the Koch brothers or any of these people. I'm just saying, hey, at the root of a lot of movements, even movements that have a lot of good points. I mean, BLM had good points, the Tea Party had good points, right? But at the root of that is deep-seated, deep-pocketed economic interests and extremely wealthy people on the ideological spectrum, right? So that's my opinion. It's not a bad thing. It's just it means that, to my advice to you folks in the media is, cover the issue in depth. Stop always trying to cast aspersions on the motivations of people. I think people are getting tired of the media. Left-wing media is trying to pick apart someone on the conservative side, and right-wing media is trying to pick apart someone on the liberal side. Engage with the ideas. If you don't like the ideas, pick apart why it's a bad idea. Don't try to say, oh, paid for a crowd, he's funding these ads, et cetera, et cetera. I think it's like, that's just playing to the base.
No, I think the problem with television, and Ardina, you could back me up on this, problem with television is it's all about the dramatic video, or else,
Right,
that's the point.
correct.
We lead with the burning building, we lead with the screaming, the baby crying, we lead with the
Correct.
protest chants. And that's why. I think that's why they go hand in hand, and why, if there's going to be a rally, whether it's organic or not, you're going to get channel 7, 2, 4, 5, 11. They're all going to be there. And that's just a
And
reality.
also, and two, you got to admit that it enhances the story narrative when a reporter can interview a protester, a mother who maybe has, 2 kids, and she's been cut off from school lunches, and she will say, in this heartfelt way, I am here today protesting because I do not have school lunch for my child.
Yes.
And to somebody who says, they're not going to come out and say that they're paid to be there, but it enhances the narrative. You
But
see,
Ardina, that's what we provide. We source the people who have those personal stories whenever possible. So we're not just providing randos off the street. We're providing people who have that story. So if you're talking about a protest around school lunch programs, we will have those mothers out there to speak on that. And that mother, do you think that mother can spend her whole day out at a protest if she's not getting paid?
great point. That is a great point. And speaking of people getting paid, you referenced George Soros before. There's a lot of mythology, and always has been, about George Soros. So I'm going to throw an abstract idea out there. Is George Soros the original crowd on demand payer? Because these rumors about Soros paying for rally members have been circulating for years.
Yeah, over 10 years.
I don't have an opinion. I'm not saying it's good or bad, but as you are in the business, give us the 411 on that.
Well, look, we didn't get in business for 13 years because we comment on who did and didn't hire us. So I can't really go
That
into.
means yes.
I can't really go into it. My policy on this sort of thing is, once you start commenting and saying this person isn't a client, then, as you guys know in the media, the folks in the media take a non-denial as a yes, right? And it's like, so I don't want to imply anything other than to say that we don't really comment on our clients, except in very extreme cases where we have to make it clear we're not associated with something if we're being accused of illegal activity, which does happen sometimes, and I have to set the record straight.
I think anyone who's upset with you and what you do right now, or mad, or think it's unfair, they're just pissed they didn't think of this first. That's all. Because
Sure.
it's a great business model. I mean, it's great.
We honestly, I have to make a confession here. In my days in the field, we always covered these chants and these demonstrations and the classic line was "No justice, no peace." So the crews from various stations were standing around one day, and we thought to ourselves, something. We said, why don't we start a business where we just market slogans?
Yes.
And we spent a half an hour in this informal discussion of what would be great if you want to protest, sneakers. What would be great if you want to protest yellow calves? And we came up with these brilliant, I mean, copyrightable phrases. Of course, it never went anywhere, but there you go. There's an idea for you, Adam. But yeah, I mean, we also were guilty of it because of the repetition of what we
Yeah.
heard all the time, constantly, and there was a dollar to be made there.
Absolutely, yeah, and slogans are important, especially in the current kind of bit. And people have such limited attention spans sometimes. It's like you have to make your point across so quickly, and that's hard. As someone who's very likes to talk a lot, it's like when you are in these cable news situations, you have to be so quick with your word and have come out with this like little slogan. You look at some of these officials that they always get brought back on cable news. It's because they come in, boom, they have a little slogan to for every single day that they're on there.
Adam, what is the largest group you've organized and what is the smallest? Without having to say specifically what it was for. What number was the
Oh,
largest number?
we've done 10, 20,000 person groups.
20,000?
Yeah,
Wait a second. Let me run that by us again.
10 to
20?
20,000 group person groups. We've done that. I mean, again, that's not every day an
The
everyday
Mets need to
occurrence.
hire you.
Pardon
Wow.
me?
The Mets need to hire you.
Sure, yeah. Well, a lot of guys,
They
I've
can't
heard
get
that about a
20,000.
few baseball teams that have had bad attendance. We're always interested. Yeah, a lot of those. We've definitely done those. I mean, again, it's that's more rare as you could. I would say average crowd size is 50 to 100. In terms of our average booking is about that. A lot of times someone will come in wanting thousands and we'll kind of work with them in regards to budget and everything, and we'll end up going for a few hundred because they can have the same effect. It's definitely, protests are definitely an 80-20 kind of thing. You can get 80% of the results with 20% of the people half the time. The smallest is one. I mean, there are times where we'll put one or two people outside a building sometimes, and that works too. I don't love doing one because it's lonely out there. To tell you the truth, I like to give it to at least have two or three because otherwise the one guy just gets kind of lonely out there, and you got to keep tabs on him and make sure he's holding the sign and everything. So I like to have two or three at minimum, but we'll do one sometimes.
Well, when your people are out there, are they monitored? Do you have a? I mean, how do you know that you pay somebody and say, okay, I'm going to give you X number of dollars per hour. How do you know that that man or woman is going to just not, they'll be out there for 15 minutes and they'll say, I got my cash, I'm out of here.
We have supervisors that are responsible for monitoring that and giving live camera shots sometimes to make sure that that is not a problem.
Hey,
Um,
that's a good point. Do they get the cash before or after? Because you have to make them show up, and to show up, many might demand cash. But then
well,
you
I'm
want
not
to
going to
make sure
go
they
into
stay.
our ways of how we operate, so I'm not going to go quite that far into it. But what I will say is that we do regularly supervise our people and make sure that they're on. I mean, the tougher part is when you have like a crowd of three that's outside. Like sometimes it's like a old school picketing kind of operation where you have three people outside all day every day for a week. Then it's a little harder. Then you have to kind of have them send pictures every couple hours to kind of show that. That's a little harder to, and you have kind of spot checks at times to make sure. It's easier if we're talking about a 20, 30 person plus demonstration. It's much easier to have real time visibility into that.
Do you coach them on what to say? I mean, God forbid that one of your people is interviewed and there's this expletive loaded statement when they are interviewed by the press.
Well, Ardina, like any movement, you have designated spokespeople, right? You can't just ask a sergeant in the military or in the police, oh, sergeant, what do you think of the NYPD's policy on tasers, right? You have to ask a press person, right? So in our demonstrations, when we're dealing, not all of our demonstrations are media sensitive, but some of them are, and the ones where we do expect media to show up, we'll designate certain people as media spokespeople. You mentioned and we'll try to have those be the ones who have the compelling narratives to share with the media and the ones who can speak in the most calm and measured tone and be the most articulate advocates for the cause.
So in other words, a spokesperson for your group is appointed, and then if Ken or I go up to and we say we want to interview somebody from the group, we are sent to the spokesperson. Is that how it works?
Correct. Yeah. And by the way, any disciplined movement should do that because otherwise, a lot of people might be passionate about a cause, but they don't know how to articulate it and they don't know how to speak in front of the camera. And they could well say something that they themselves regret that leads them to lose their job or other opportunities. You've seen this so often with cancel culture. You've had such cancel culture from the left. Now you're seeing cancel culture from the right on some of these campus demonstrators, which I oppose just as vehemently. And so I think that my recommendation, by the way, to anyone, if you're at a protest and you're not someone who's done a lot of media before, I would not speak to the media, frankly, because you might well, if you say something smart, it's just going to be one little part of the clip. If you see something stupid, that could go viral, and boom, you could be out of a job. So I really think it's something people need to be very cautious about.
Hey, Adam, has there ever been a topic or an organization that went to hire you, perfectly legal, but something that for moral grounds, you just said, I'm not going to take the money? You know, like for instance, you may be a restaurateur, you may not agree with this group and that group, but you'll still serve them food. In your case, has there ever been an organization, without saying what organization or group, where you just said, no, I can't do this?
Yeah, well, there have been a few categories. One has been hostile, hostile foreign countries have tried to kind of bring us in at different times, or people who I suspect are representatives of those countries who are trying to undermine things in the United States using protests as a method. There are definitely times where I suspect that I'm being pitched by an arm of a foreign country. I have no interest in that. I'm a very proud American, so I have no interest in advancing another country's objectives. I'm here to advance America. Number one. Number two, there have been some groups that I think are deeply, deeply racist that have tried to bring us in where we have respectfully declined. So there's that. And there's certain political ones that I won't go into detail on where their views are just very different from mine, and I felt that I couldn't support their way of doing things, so I declined to do that. And then the last category is I like to demonstrate against the powerful, right, and to hold the powerful accountable. I don't necessarily like demonstrations where we're bullying people. So even though that can be illegal, I don't love bullying. So I try not to take on anything where I feel like we're being a bully. And I'll just leave it at that.
What about expanding abroad? I mean, you've done well here in the United States, but there must be inquiries that are coming from other countries.
Oh, absolutely. And it's still something we're assessing. I mean, we're continuing to assess and evaluate partners abroad on that. You have to keep in mind, Ardina, that different countries have different laws when it comes to freedom of speech, right? So in America, we have pretty broad protections, both in terms of criticizing our government and critiquing public figures and corporations. Not every country gives you that right. For example, just one fun example, fun, maybe not so fun if you're caught up in it, is Thailand has some very, very strong anti-defamation laws. And that's to say, you leave a bad Yelp review. You said, I thought the service was really bad at this hotel. That can be considered defamation, and not only can that be civil, can sometimes be a criminal offense. I've heard there was an Australian guy who complained. He said he had a bad flight on Thai Airlines, and I guess Thai Airlines literally sued him for critiquing how his flight went, because they said his critique was inaccurate, right? So when you're looking at abroad, you just have to be careful at what those laws are. I mean, that's an extreme case, of course, but I mean, even like if you look at the UK, there are different laws, and they have what they call hate speech is it's a very slippery slope because I think we don't. They call a lot of things incitement that I think most Americans would just call political speech,
Right.
and I think that's very dangerous. So it gives me pause about operating there, even though we get a lot of inquiries there. So it's just a matter of evaluating who we want to work with and how we want to do it. But we probably will at some point.
Even in Canada, Canada has much stricter rules than we do. You think of Canada as just little U.S., not little physically, but little in terms of population. But
Give it a couple months.
Yeah, you have to be very careful. And specifically, you mentioned the UK, specifically in the subnations, if you will, of Wales and Scotland. Do you know that if you stop and appear to be praying in public, not even saying the words out loud, you can be arrested?
I did not know that.
They do not have freedom of religion and freedom of speech and freedom of assembly like we do. We take it for granted. So you're absolutely right. So I give you a lot of credit for having to take the time to research that before you would go into those countries. I'm sure if it could be done, somebody would have done it, as they say, right? But
That's
again,
right.
We didn't think that you existed. So there you go.
Well, I'm glad that you know I exist.
And we are too. Listen, I think there is definitely a very good purpose for you. Sometimes, look, I think the people who would be most upset are the people who wouldn't agree with the organizations you would supply, if you will.
Correct.
But at the same time, I think if I were on the other side, I would want to know that, look, I may feel that my point of view is a moral and correct point of view, but I just can't get people's attention.
Yeah.
And I could come to you and you could help me get people's attention. That doesn't mean
Correct.
I'm doing something immoral or wrong. It's
No.
just, I want you to pay attention to me for a second and maybe you'll learn something. Or maybe you'll hear what I have to say.
And a crowd does that. It just has that effect. When you have 50 people out there, it's better than having one. I always say, imagine if Martin Luther King had given his I Have a Dream speech with 10 people there, right? Wouldn't have had the same effect.
That's
So
exactly
a great
right.
point. Now, speaking of your business, Adam, you've obviously grown from a small operation to a large operation. Are you going to grow further and keep the same business model, or is there going to be a franchise? Are you going to add some more bells and whistles? What's the trajectory of Crowds on Demand?
Well, one of the big things that we have morphed into doing is overseeing full-scale advocacy campaigns. So we're best known for doing protests, but we also do phone banking. We do create websites. We create 501c4 advocacy groups. We create movements from the ground up, essentially, whether it's to advocate for a business or for a cause. So it's a very valuable service to be able to have a client come to us and be upset about an issue and say, we can not only organize demonstrations, but we can essentially oversee the entire campaign from the ground up. So that's one of the big things that we are doing, and we're working on expanding that. I also like one of the things we love to do is also kind of on the fun side of things, really do clever PR stunts for businesses. A lot of times you have a trade show where a business really wants to get well known, and we'll do clever events to get them well known. Again, using people and costumes and everything. One of my favorite examples of this is one called Bankers Against Bitcoin. It went viral on the internet. It topped Reddit, and it was around a large cryptocurrency conference. We organized a bunch of kind of older white guys in old suits masquerading as bankers, and it was Bankers Against Bitcoin. So these bankers were protesting Bitcoin because these days you're defined not only by who's with you but who's against you. So you're defining your enemy a little bit. So things like that we do all the time on behalf of companies, and it's really fun, and it's a lot less adversarial than some of this sort of advocacy work that we do, and I just love doing that.
Hey, Adam, I got to ask what your background is. My guess is you were either a publicist, PR, or a lawyer, or a journalist. One of those three. Am I on the right path?
Well, sure. Well, I'm 33 now, and I started the business in college. So I wasn't really anything when I started the business. I had worked on political campaigns. I had worked just at random jobs that would hire me. I worked at American Airlines one year. I did work as a reporter for AOL News at one point. So I'd seen things from the political side. I'd seen things from the journalism side. Never been a lawyer. Um, but on the political side, one thing I did notice was that on the journalism side, I noticed everything that you said earlier, Ken and Ardina, of hey, you need the visuals and reporters are going to cover these sort of protests for sure. On the political side, one thing that I noticed, and I worked mostly on the Democratic side at the time, I definitely would consider myself an independent now, though, is that we would all the guys who managed I ran all of the college outreach for Jerry Brown's campaign. He was the former governor of California in 2010, and the guys who ran the campaign were these old hippies, like former hippies from the 60s, and they were like, Adam, we need like 10,000 students tomorrow. And that, because that's how things worked back in the 60s. And I was like, what the, you know what? Like, how am I supposed to get 10,000 students? Well, anyway, I never got 10,000 students, full disclosure. But when you would get a few hundred people right out there, it would make a difference. And but I noticed it made an even bigger difference when you had protesters at the other side's rally, right? Because you could have 20 people, the other the other person is having a rally, let's just say with 1,000 people. We put 20 people outside, then the coverage is demonstrators are picketing the candidates rally, right? So now we get half the time, even though we're 2% of the people, right? So I actually found that it was a little more value for money, but I was kind of annoyed at that time because the pay was crap and honestly the pay was bad, but we were basically doing hundreds of thousands in earned media for the campaign, right? And for your listeners, I don't have to tell you guys what earned media is, but for your listeners, earned media is essentially what it would cost if you were to pay that for advertising for that amount of media that you get. So we're delivering a lot of earned media.
Ardina can talk to this too. I mean, Ardina, all the years you would cover by cropping with the camera, you crop and you get 10 people in a shot. Then you go to the 1,000 crowd, you get 10 people in the shot. The viewer at home doesn't know that one is 1,000 and one is only 10. It looks like the same size group.
Exactly.
It's all context.
What we did in some ways. I mean, and I know it's a strong term, but it was actually manipulating the perception of the presence of the crowd.
It's true. It's true.
I have to tell you very well before we're getting towards the end of it. I have to tell you a very funny story about when I had worked I was an apprentice at ABC Network way back in the day, and one of the guys, the cameraman that I worked with, was a guy named John Fletcher, who was the first African American male cameraman in the news industry, and he was my teacher for that period of time. And he said to me, he smoked a cigar, and he said, "Sweetie, let me tell you something. When you see a white cop beating up a black man, zoom in for the close-up. When you see a black man beating up a white cop, shoot it on a wide shot." So, that was, I only mentioned that to try to add to the illustration. But yeah, I mean, the thing is that that there is a way of shooting it so that you can kind of determine or give the impression of a big crowd and a smaller crowd. But,
Yeah.
You have a great business, and I got to tell you, I never thought that Madison Avenue would disappear, but it's about to, based on you and other entrepreneurs like you who are thinking out of the box and apparently doing it the right way.
We're trying to give a voice for, like I said, for the silent majority, for a lot of interesting issues, and we're trying to do it, of course, in a legal, ethical way. And it's really a fun business, and I love doing the events, and I also love the opportunity to come on programs like yours to explain what it is we do, especially in this sort of long format where we can really discuss it in depth.
Well, thank you, Adam. And with that, since he's in the center of the screen, my friend Ken Rosato gets the last
What an honor. Oh, look at that. Well, here, I'm just going to say this. I know a handful of publicists in and around New York City who are going to ask me for your number. So I'll get it from Ardina because can you set things up in the New York City area?
Absolutely. It was our second market after LA. Now
Oh.
we're nationwide, by the way. I should say we're nationwide now, but New York was our second market. It's actually, I will say, and I'm not just pandering, it's my favorite market to work in. It just New York. New Yorkers have a lot of character. They're easy to work with. They show up on time. They don't complain when it's raining or cold. So New York is actually my favorite market to work in of all markets in the country.
And the
There's
people
plenty of work
walking
for
by, I was going to say the people who walk by the protesters are unfazed. It's like if you go to
Yeah.
Oshkosh, Wisconsin, they'll cower in fear. New
That's
Yorkers
very
just
true.
kind of chew gum. They walk past. They're on their phone. You could be screaming, "You're an idiot! You're an," and people walk right by and just yawn. It means nothing to a New Yorker. That's a good day to a New Yorker.
Yeah, that is so true. That is so true. And when I do get their attention, that's how I know we've done a good job.
No, there you go. All right, Mr.
Feel
Rosato.
free to give anyone my number. That's totally cool.
I'm
And
serious.
and guys, thanks so much for having me on. It's a great conversation. I love all of your points. I love the chance to kind of talk through the business in depth. I think there's not enough in depth programming these days, and we need more of it. And what you guys do, I know you guys cover kind of broader issues like this, but I know you kind of cover local too, and I think that's important.
And thank you, Adam, for being a very gracious and informative guest. All
My
right,
pleasure.
Having you on.
Ken, Mr. Rosato, you are on to sign us off.
Well, thank you. And it's always a pleasure to work with my dear friend Ardina. We're together over, 22, 23 years we know each other. We worked together for 20 of those years.
Time.
So it's so good to be on again with you at all, always. And Adam, it was so good to have you on. What a fascinating concept. I'm totally impressed. And I know a lot of people I tell about this aren't going to believe it. They're going to scratch their heads and say, no kidding, that's an industry. Very, very impressive. Great ideas.
That, folks, we are over and out. Have a great week.